Jeff Pruitt. He was a student in my non-Western literature course that I taught last semester. In that course, we looked at literatures from different cultures around the world and their intersection with Western civilization. So these intersections were not necessarily friendly. So Jeff is going to talk about the letters that Hernan Cortez, the colonizer of the Aztec Empire, wrote to Emperor Charles I to discuss the power relations that were forming at that time between the Spanish colonizers and Charles and the Aztecs. So Jeff is going to talk about his project on that.
As Dr. Costa said, my name is Jeff Pruitt. The title of my presentation is Slaying the Sacred Python, Aztec Colonialism and the Advent of Post-Colonial Studies. To begin, I'd like to give a brief introduction to my topic. For centuries, Western countries have had encounters with seemingly less developed primitive cultures. In some cases, mutual respect and admiration are shared, and the exchange is beneficial for both parties. Overwhelmingly, though, the case has been that these first world countries, after coming into contact with native tribes, have had a detrimental, if not tragic, impact on the culture of these indigenous people. So from the time of the first Spanish explorers, colonialists such as Hernan Cortez, in their search for treasure and glory, have imposed morality and customs upon civilizations that seem quite content and prosperous on their own. In Cortez's second letter to King Charles V, written in 1520, these elements can be seen. While self-admittedly admiring certain aspects of the Aztecs, Cortez and his men nevertheless used force as a means to oppress the natives. Operating under the guise of religion, Cortez portrayed the Aztecs as savages, and with this position of moral superiority, justified brutality in his writings to Charles V. It is my intention is to discuss the second letter from Cortez to the Spanish king in an attempt to highlight this historical incident and illustrate its importance as one among a group that is considered significant to the discipline of post-colonial studies. Before addressing the work, just to give a quick definition of colonialism, and this definition is provided by Jürgen Osterhammel. In it, he says, colonialism is a relationship between an indigenous or forcibly imported majority and a minority of foreign invaders. The fundamental decisions affecting the lives of the colonized people are made and implemented by the colonial rulers in pursuit of interests that are often defined in a distant metropolis, rejecting cultural compromises with the colonized population. The colonizers are convinced of their own superiority and their ordained mandate to rule. And this definition would lend itself well to this particular case of Cortez and the Aztecs. And so by being one of the first examples of colonialism, one can see the significance in terms of post-colonial studies. The conquest of the Aztecs, along with the entire colonization of the Americas, was a major contributing factor to the rise of post-colonialism, so it was hugely influential as a starting point for the discipline. And so using the conquest of the Americas as a template, post-colonial theory looks at issues of power, economics, politics, religion, and culture, and how these elements work in relation to colonial hegemony. One way that these issues are addressed is by asking questions. Just a couple typical questions by a post-colonial critic would be such as, how does the literary text explicitly or allegorically represent various aspects of colonial oppression? And what person or groups does the work identify as other? How are such persons, groups described and treated? And real quick, before I get to the letter, just a little background information and some context. Cortez had previously disobeyed his superior's explicit orders by venturing onto the land. So in this letter, Cortez must make the case that his achievements outweigh his transgressions. So he focuses on the magnificence of the Aztec Empire by describing the city of Tenochtitlan in detail. So this elevates his comments later when he highlights his military achievements and justifies his brutality by suggesting that the Aztecs met their downfall because they refused to give up their devotion to their gods. And so now looking at the second letter of Cortez to the Spanish ruler King Charles V, one can begin to see the conditions that had existed within the Aztec Empire before his arrival. Technologically advanced and efficiently organized, their capital was a wonder even for Cortez, who had grown up in the Spanish Empire. As he writes, I came upon an extremely powerful fort with 2 towers, surrounded by a 6-foot wall with a battlement running around the whole of the side, abutting the 2 causeways, and having 2 gates and no more for going in and out. 5,000 of the chief citizens came out to greet me. After they greet him, they proceeded to perform a ceremony for Cortez, and he meets their leader, Montezuma. And this is just a depiction of Cortez meeting Montezuma. So after the introductions, Cortez then begins to walk around and explore the city, and he describes the surroundings. He's impressed and talks of the streets and how they're very broad and fine and so straight that one can see from one end of it to the other, though it is some 2/3 of the league in length and lined on both sides with very beautiful large houses, both private dwellings and temples. Cortez continues to explain the layout of the city, and he's impressed in particular with the markets that are held in open squares within the city. He notes that one square in particular is twice as big as that of Salamanca, a city in Spain. Cortez goes on explaining the multitude and variety of items available on the market, ranging from all types of food, birds, deer, fish, vegetables, fruits, to materials, shells, feathers, limestone, bricks, cotton, animal skins, and china, and restaurants, apothecaries, and even a barbershop. So it is overwhelming and almost beyond the comprehension of Cortez, a man who at the time would presumably be educated and well-traveled, most likely even more so than his contemporaries. He seems to be impressed with the sophistication and continues. He talks about how the Aztecs use regulations and enforcement to ensure that fair business transactions are taking place. Certain items are sold only on certain streets. And Cortez mentions the building that serves as a kind of audience chamber. So it would suggest that the Aztec society, with a population in the millions, was intent on their citizens and merchants conducting business on an even scale. And it could also be suggested then that in comparison, the Aztec culture was equal to, if not greater than, comparable European cities in terms of organization and commercial viability at that time. Another point to look at, and one that was noted by Cortez, would be the general demeanor and attitude of the Aztec people. After having presented him with a pearl necklace, Cortez says that Montezuma returned a short time later with many various ornaments of gold, silver, and featherwork, and some 5,000 or 6,000 cotton clothes, richly dyed and embroidered in various ways. So it appears that Cortez would believe Montezuma and the other Aztecs to be generous people, but this could be partially attributed to the fact that Montezuma feared the Spaniards, or what might be more accurate is that he wanted to gain favor with Cortez, knowing that his enemies might align with the explorer in an attempt to overthrow and remove Montezuma as leader. And then another important element about the dynamic between Cortez and Montezuma is rooted in Aztec beliefs. As one critic, Jeffrey Broad, says, the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521 to Hernan Cortez and his Spanish army was due in part to the religion of the Aztecs. The Aztec king Montezuma II is said to have believed that the Spanish leader was Tabiltzin Quetzalcoatl, the long-lost priest king of the Toltecs. And the Toltecs were just an influential dynasty that preceded the Aztecs, and the time of the Toltecs was looked upon as a golden age. So referred to as our young prince, the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl was revered, and it was prophesied that he would return, and possibly in 1519. And so by amazing coincidence, Cortez, wearing a feathered helmet, arrived in Mesoamerica that year, and Montezuma welcomed Cortez as the returning feathered serpent. So by the sheer luck of Cortez arriving at that moment, Montezuma and the Aztecs believed that the prophecy had been fulfilled. So, being preordained, Montezuma saw it as his divine duty to welcome the Spaniards with open arms and show them respect and devotion. So he offers his submission, and so with all this combined, then Montezuma wanting to stay in power, looking to gain favor with Cortez, and the fulfillment of this ancient prophecy, Cortez is put into a position of power. And the first thing Cortez does with his power is to take Montezuma hostage and begin the conquest. As he writes, I considered it essential both from my observation of the city and the rest of the land that its ruler should be in my power and no longer entirely free, to the end that he might in no wise change his will and attempt to serve your majesty. So next, Cortez enters an enormous mosque, and seeing the idols the Aztecs worship, orders them to be desecrated. As he writes again, the greatest of these idols and those in which they place most faith and trust are ordered to be dragged from their places and flung down the stairs. At first, the Aztecs respond with alarm, saying the people will revolt in fear and that they will die of starvation as a result of not worshiping their idols. Cortez reprimands them, saying they should believe in his God, the one true God, Eventually, they relent and agree with Cortez, citing their belief that his presence is divine and that they are at his mercy. Lastly, Cortez instructs the Aztecs to stop the worship of their gods through the practice of sacrifice. As he says, I forbade them, moreover, to make human sacrifice to the idols, as was their wont, because besides being an abomination in the sight of God, it is prohibited by your majesty's laws, which declare that he who kills shall be killed. And so in doing this, Cortez fails to realize the importance of this custom and the significance of human sacrifice to the Aztec religion. The Aztecs believed that there were two divine forces in the human body, the heart and the head. Because of the potency of these forces, each human being was considered a type of divining rod connecting the earth to the heavens. And with all these demands met by the Aztecs, it would seem that Cortez would be in total control at this point. But that was not the case. Angry at Cortez and Moctezuma and other tribal leaders, the Aztecs soon revolted and began attacking the Spaniards. Overwhelmed initially, Cortez and his men retreated. They soon re-engaged the Aztecs, and the battle began in earnest. It raged for days, I think maybe a week or so, and at Cortez's request, Moctezuma tried speaking to the Aztecs in an attempt to stop the fighting. Failing to control the crowd, however, Moctezuma was struck by a rock and died 3 days later. Ultimately, Cortez lost this battle and was forced to leave the city, but eventually the Spanish forces were too strong for the Aztecs to hold off, and they were defeated by the Spaniards. This paved the way for the colonization of the Aztecs, and for the next 300 years or so, Mexico would remain a Spanish colony. And that concludes my presentation, unless anyone has any questions.